Hello, and welcome back to What Would Aristotle Do? A foolhardy attempt by a non-philosopher, that's me, to reinterpret Aristotelian virtue ethics for the modern world. This is the third video on the cardinal virtues described by Aristotle. If you have somehow missed out on the first two videos, which covered justice and practical wisdom, I'll put links to them here, if I can work out how to do it. Unlike the other virtues, which need a bit of explanation, I think most of us have a pretty good idea of what courage is. I think it can be summed up as feel the fear and do it anyway. Aristotle elevates courage to a cardinal virtue because, basically, doing good is hard. Now, why is it hard? Because of fear. Fear can stop you doing the right thing because of the possible consequences. These could be pain, injury, or death, or more likely in the modern world, being publicly shamed, losing jobs or status, or friends and family. Aristotle says that it's only courage if you are overcoming fear to do good. That means that Nazis who overcome their fear in order to do evil, or thrill seekers who jump off high buildings, are not showing courage. He also says that there are things that you should fear because they encourage you to do the right thing. So you shouldn't overcome your fear of letting down your friends and family, for example. Courage, according to Aristotle, is at the mean point between cowardice and recklessness. Now, a lot of his examples relate to war, probably because the Athens of 2,500 years ago was pretty much at war all the time. Because thankfully, being in battle or even being exposed to violence is a pretty rare appearance to those of us who are fortunate enough to live in the Western world, I'll try to come up with some different examples. This video is going to be a bit more personal than the previous ones, so if you feel that old people showing vulnerability is cringe, or it gives you the ick, or whatever it is you young people call it nowadays, I'll try to remember to flag up when I'm going to get personal, so you can skip forward a bit. Anyway, cowardice and recklessness. Cowardice could be defined as feeling the fear and not doing it. Recklessness is doing it without concern for the consequences. Here's a bit of cringe coming up now. I've never really thought of myself as a courageous person. When I think about courage, I think about times I've wanted to have a conversation with a stranger and ducked out of it. I've thought about what would happen if my country went to war. Would I have the courage to fight and die for what I believe to be right? Recently, I've thought about attending political demonstrations and marches. Would I be willing to take the risk of being arrested and thrown in jail? In all of these cases, I find myself failing to live up to my own standard of what constitutes courage, either in real life or in my imagination. However, when I started to prepare for this episode, I began to think about things that I have done which other people might think of as courageous, and I came up with a few examples. I've spent quite a lot of time solo sailing over the last 3 years. Many people would regard that as being reckless. From my point of view, as someone who has sailed about 5,000 miles before starting to sail solo, it's more of a calculated risk. Years ago, I was an outdoor activities instructor. We used to talk about the 3 stages of arousal, although we didn't call it that, as it was in the 90s when using words like arousal would have caused adults who should know better to snigger. The first stage is your comfort zone. When you're here, you're not learning anything because it's too easy. The second stage is stretch. This is when your awareness is heightened, the adrenaline is starting to pump, and you're really feeling alive. You're scanning for potential problems, but you're ready to take action should something happen. A couple of days ago, I had exactly this experience. The wind had got up to about 20 knots. That's 24 miles an hour, or nearly 40 kilometres an hour to you landlubbers. And the swell was about 1.5 metres. I was sailing a quite narrow passage between an island and the mainland, and as the wind was in my face, I was having to zigzag to make progress. I spent a good 90 minutes on high alert, thinking, should I zig or zag now? Should I stay closer to the island or to the land? If something breaks now, will I be able to sort it out before we run aground? In the event, something did break. I did sort it out, and it turned out to be one of the best days sailing I've ever had. The strange thing is, whenever I've been off a boat for a couple of days, I forget that I'm actually a pretty competent sailor, and the thought of going out in anything but the friendliest of conditions fills me with anxiety. It feels like an act of courage just to step on a boat again. There's this guy called Les Powells who built a sister ship to mine. This was in the 70s, when building your own boat was a much more usual way for people who would not otherwise be able to afford it to go sailing. Once he had fitted her out, he set off around the world, although he was, in fact, barely able to sail. He almost crashed the boat getting out of the harbour. For me, he was definitely on the recklessness side of the spectrum. Although, objectively speaking, coastal sailing, which is what I do, is far more difficult than sailing across an ocean, because there's very little to hit. And ironically, after successfully crossing the Atlantic, he managed literally to crash into Brazil after making an elementary navigation error. The other thing that I do that could be described as courageous or reckless is climbing. Most of the time nowadays I climb indoors, where the crash mats on the floor make the sport relatively safe. The worst injury I ever suffered is a turned ankle when falling from the top move of a pretty high climbing problem. When I was younger and had just started climbing, I did have a fall outside. It was 6 metres up and the ground was smooth and grassy, but it did result in me spending a night in hospital under observation. And despite this nasty experience, I kept climbing. Nowadays, when I'm bouldering, which is climbing short routes without ropes but with crash mats, I find that I don't worry about making hard moves at the top of climbs. Maybe it's because I've fallen or jumped down from the top of my local gym enough times to know that I won't get hurt. Is that really courage at all? I don't feel it as such. It's more that I know what I can do and what I can't. I know what my foot will stick on and what it will slip from, and I know that focusing my attention on the foot that might slip will only make it more likely. I've fallen hundreds of times, and the number of times I've hurt myself can still be counted on the fingers of one hand. When talking about courage, Aristotle says that professional soldiers will not feel as much fear in battle as ordinary citizens, since their experience gives them a better idea of what is dangerous and what isn't. I'd say that my experience of sailing and climbing has had the same effect. My experience of spending lots and lots of time in stretch mode has given me a much better idea of what risks I am actually taking. And so I don't fear things that might terrify a novice climber or sailor. Now, if you have been paying attention, you might be shouting at the screen here, telling me that Aristotle says that courage is only courage when the act is good. Is it not true that sailing and climbing are things that I do for myself, and so overcoming fear in those circumstances cannot be counted as courage? Well, this is where I don't agree with Aristotle. I think that if you are facing your fears as part of your own human flourishing, then that counts as good, and therefore can be described as courageous. In my working life, I've often been seen as someone who would tell the truth, even in very high pressure situations. This has been an advantage in some situations, but a definite disadvantage in others. Looking back now, I think that this honesty came more from a fear of being caught in a lie than having the courage to tell the truth. Although I have had jobs with relatively high levels of responsibility, there have been a number of times when I've avoided or even turned down the chance to move to the next level. I think that on some level I felt that I would get shown up if I climbed too high. I've often had this feeling of being right on the edge of an immeasurably high cliff at work. I've since learned that imposter syndrome is something that's felt by many people in positions of responsibility. Is that what I was feeling? Maybe. Is imposter syndrome a kind of cowardice? Possibly. It's in my personal life that, at least to me anyway, I feel that I have failed to measure up in terms of courage. I've kept quiet to keep the peace. I've gone along with the desires of others without even considering what I wanted. Why did I do this? To return to Aristotle's teaching of courage, I think that it was from fear. I wanted to be a good person, and I thought that by going along with what the other person wanted, it would both make them happy and demonstrate that I was good. However, it turned out to be unsustainable. By paying too much attention to the needs of others, I was missing out on my own personal flourishing. I didn't take the time to understand what would make me happy. And this came to the surface as resentment. And if there's one thing that makes people unhappy, it's another person going along with what they want with a bad heart. I'm better at this now. I've spent more time thinking about my own needs and values, and I'm now able to separate the things that I want from the things that other people want. And if I agree to do something with or for somebody else, I know why I'm doing it, even if it's not necessarily something I would do of my own volition. I will do it happily. Is this courage? I don't know. I'm certainly less afraid that, unless I go along with everything the other person wants, then I will suffer pain. In Aristotle's terms, this was a fear that should be overcome. The other thing to note is that this is an ongoing process. I still feel the fear sometimes, and sometimes I succumb to it. Comfortingly, Aristotle says that courage is something that is developed over a lifetime. It's not something that you either have or you haven't. So I'm content with that. The thing that courage presupposes is that people have free will. You have to be able to choose whether to do the courageous thing, the cowardly thing, or the reckless thing. There's a fantastic scene in the film Dangerous Liaisons where Valmont, played by John Malkovich, dumps Madame de Tourvel, played by Michelle Pfeiffer, in the cruelest way, saying repeatedly, "It's beyond my control." It's cruel because it's clearly his choice to do it. And yet at the same time, he's been played by the Glenn Close character to reject the one he truly loves. Now, I could do an entire video on free will and on my objections to the arguments of the determinists, but for now, let's just say that it appears to us, both in the moment and when we look back at times when we thought that we showed courage, and those where we feel that we failed to live up to our own standards, that there was a choice that we had to make, and we made one. We either made the hard but good choice, or the easy but bad one. If you don't really believe that there's such a thing as free will, then, to be honest, there's no point in watching videos about ethics. People just do what they do, and that's that. Ironically, if you're a strict determinist and you're still watching this video, then there's nothing you can do about it. It's your destiny to watch until you foam at the mouth about how idiotic I am. Aristotle recognizes that courage takes free will. He also understands that not everyone has free will all the time. He says that animals, called brutes in my translation, mostly do not have free will because they are slaves to their nature. Even for animals, he says that they can make sacrifices for their offspring, which could be thought of as being courageous. He talks a lot about licentiousness and incontinence in the book. I didn't really get why he does that until I started writing the script for this part of the video. The licentious person is one who knows what the right thing to do is, but chooses to do the wrong thing for their own pleasure. The Marquis de Sade depicts many examples of such people, both male and female, in his books and plays. A long time ago I read some of Juliet, and I found it truly shocking, even to a young man in the late 20th century. The incontinent person, by contrast, knows what the right thing to do is and wants to do the right thing, but for some reason they fail to do it. They could be addicts, for instance, or cowards. Aristotle thinks that the incontinent person is not as bad as the licentious ones, because they at least want to do the right thing. To sum up the above, I think that Aristotle believes that courage requires free will, but that some people do not have the requisite free will to demonstrate courage. Finally, there's a lot of talk, particularly on self-help YouTube, about vulnerability, in the sense of sharing things about yourself that you don't necessarily think are desirable. For example, you might talk about a time when you were mean to someone who wanted help, or about your tendency to fall in love with people who you think are unavailable, and then lose interest the moment that they express any desire for you. You might think I've shown a bit of vulnerability in this video. For me, at least, I've been pretty careful, because I don't really know who you are. One thing I've learnt in life is that you should only be vulnerable with people who you trust will not exploit your vulnerability, and that does require trust. Of course, the first step in being vulnerable is admitting to yourself that there are parts of you that you are not proud of and that you would like to change. This is the path to eudaimonia, and it is painful. So I would say that, under my definition of courage, it passes the test. For Aristotle, it doesn't, because it's not directly courage in the service of others. In summary, courage is a cardinal virtue because doing the right thing is hard and can cause you to go through pain and even risk death. The fear of pain and death can stop you from doing the right thing, and you should work to overcome those fears. There are other fears, like the fear of being condemned as a coward, that are good fears, and we should not attempt to overcome these. Aristotle thinks that courage is only present when the act is in the service of the good. If you overcome fear to act in a way that harms people, then by definition you are not showing courage. My view is that acts or practices that are in the service of your own flourishing can be described as courageous when you have to overcome fear to do them, even when the only person that benefits is yourself. Well, I hope that gave you some food for thought. If you have anything that you'd like to share, especially if you think I've missed something, it will be great if you comment below the video. And if you've got this far, thank you for watching What Would Aristotle Do?